You've heard this story before, or so you think. You know the bow, you know the clay figure, you know the thumb. But here's what I want to ask you before we begin. What do you do with a story that disturbs you? Do you set it aside? Do you explain it away? Or do you stay with the discomfort long enough to let it teach you something? Because the story of Ekalavya is not a simple story about injustice. It's something far more difficult than that. It's a story about what a society chooses to value, what a guru truly owes a student, and what it means to love something so completely that even when it's taken away from you, you remain whole. His name was Ekalavya, and almost everything you were told about him missed the point. The Legend of Ekalavya, the student the world failed. An audiobook for Samsara Sagas. The Pandavas and the Kauravas were being trained by Dronacharya, the greatest military teacher of the age. Drona was a Brahmin who had mastered both the Vedas and the Vedangas of warfare. His ashram near Hastinapur was where the sons of kings came to learn. And among all his students, the one he loved most was Arjuna. Brilliant, devoted, disciplined. Drona had made a private vow that Arjuna would be the greatest archer in the world. Now, into this world came a boy from the forest. His name was Ekalavya, and he was the son of Hiranyadhanu, the chief of the Nishadas, a forest-dwelling tribal community who lived outside the Vedic social order. Ekalavya had watched the arrows of the Kshatriya princes fly through the air and felt something catch fire in his chest. He wanted to learn. More than anything he had ever wanted in his life, he wanted to learn archery from Dronacharya. He came to the ashram and presented himself. Drona turned him away. The reason is rarely spoken plainly, but it is not hidden. Ekalavya was a Nishada. He was not of the twice-born castes. He did not belong in that space by the rules of the world he had been born into. Drona did not refuse him out of cruelty, or not cruelty alone. He refused him because the world had been arranged in a way that made the refusal seem natural, even necessary. And here's the first thing people miss about this story. Ekalavya did not argue, he didn't plead, and nor did he collapse in despair. He went home to the forest and he built a clay statue of Dronacharya. And he began to teach himself. This is the part of the story that should stop you in your tracks. Because what Ekalavya did next is not ordinary. It's barely human in the most extraordinary sense of that phrase. He treated the clay figure as his guru. He performed the rituals of discipleship before it every morning. He offered flowers, he paid his respects, and then he practiced. Day after day, year after year, alone in the forest with no correction, no encouragement, and no feedback. Only his own body, the bow, the target, and the clay face of a man who did not know he existed. And he became extraordinary. Here's a lesser-known detail that the text preserves. When the Pandavas were once hunting in the forest, their dog ran barking towards something in the undergrowth and then came back, its mouth silenced but unharmed, its jaws filled with arrows, placed so skillfully that the dog could not bark but was not injured. Arjuna examined those arrows. He had never seen such technique. 7 arrows had been fired at the speed of thought, placed between the dog's teeth with the precision of a surgeon. Arjuna, the pride of Drona's life, the greatest archer in the kingdom, was humbled. He went to Drona and said, with genuine confusion, "Who did this? Who is better than me?" They found Ekalavya in the forest, covered in dust, deep in practice. And Drona saw immediately what had happened. A student he had rejected had surpassed the student he had chosen. What Drona did next has troubled people for 2,000 years, and it should. He asked Ekalavya for his right thumb as Guru Dakshina, as the fee a student pays a teacher. The cruelty of this is almost architectural. A teacher who refused to teach is now claiming the fee of a teacher. A man who gave nothing is demanding the most precious thing the student possesses, and he is invoking the most sacred contract in the Vedic tradition to do it, the bond between Guru and Shishya, which a true student cannot refuse. Let that sit for a moment. And now let me tell you the thing that breaks the heart entirely. Ekalavya did not hesitate. He smiled. He touched the feet of the clay statue. He drew his knife and he gave the thumb. With no anger, no bitterness, and no negotiation. Some scholars have argued that this is the tragedy of a system that produced such absolute obedience in its students that even injustice could be accepted as sacred. Others have argued that Ekalavya's act was one of the most profound demonstrations of transcendence in all of Indian literature, that he understood something about devotion that went beyond outcome and beyond self. Both are true, and neither is complete. Because here is the lesser-known piece of this story that most people never hear. Even after giving his thumb, Ekalavya continued to practice archery. He adapted. He developed a technique using his remaining fingers. He did not stop. He did not break. The thumb was taken. The archer remained. Most tellings of the Ekalavya story end here, at the severed thumb, but the Mahabharata does not. Ekalavya grew up. He became a warrior of great renown. He eventually became an ally of Jarasandha, the powerful king of Magadha, and fought in his armies. And in one of the deepest ironies that the epic preserves, it was Krishna himself, the upholder of dharma, the guide of the Pandavas, who killed Ekalavya in battle. The text is brief about this, but the fact is there. The boy who was turned away from the school of dharma, who taught himself everything alone in the forest, who gave his thumb to a teacher who had given him nothing, that boy grew up to fight on the other side of the Great War. Not because he was evil, but because the world had never given him a reason to stand with the people who had rejected him. There is a Tamil tradition that goes even further. Some regional versions of the Mahabharata suggest that Ekalavya was, in fact, a relative of Krishna. Some say a cousin, born of Krishna's paternal uncle. If this is true, then the story acquires a dimension of pain that is almost unbearable. Rejected by the world of the Kshatriyas, related by blood to the man who would ultimately end his life. Whether or not one accepts that reading, the arc of Ekalavya's life carries a terrible coherence. The system that pushed him out at the beginning was the same system whose war he died opposing at the end. He was never given a side, and so he found one. Now let us speak of what is really going on in this story, because there are three things happening simultaneously, and we owe it to Ekalavya to see all of them. The first is societal reality. Ekalavya was a Nishada. His community existed outside the fourfold Varna system. This is not a metaphor. It was a material fact that determined everything about his life. Who could teach him, what he could learn, which courts he could enter, and whose side he would end up on. The Mahabharata is one of the few texts in the ancient world honest enough to show us the cost of a system that sorts people by birth. It does not editorialize. It simply shows us what happened. The second is the question of Drona. We must not be too quick to make Drona a simple villain. He was a man of his time, bound by its codes, shaped by its compromises. But the text is unsparing. Drona's primary motivation in asking for the thumb was not principle. It was protection. He had promised Arjuna supremacy, and Ekalavya had made that promise impossible to keep. What Drona did was not the act of a teacher. It was the act of a man protecting an investment. The third, and the most difficult to sit with, Ekalavya's response. That gesture of giving the thumb without hesitation has been read as the ultimate nobility. And it is. But it's also worth asking, had the system he was born into conditioned him so completely that he could not imagine resistance? Was his obedience a sign of spiritual transcendence, or was it the most sophisticated form of oppression, the kind that makes the oppressed participate in their own diminishment with grace? The Mahabharata does not answer this question. It holds both possibilities in its hands, and that is precisely why it's a great text. Ekalavya's story did not end on that forest floor 2,000 years ago. It is happening today in 1,000 forms, in 1,000 places. In the child told their dreams are not for people like them. In the employee who teaches themselves everything in the margins while others are trained and mentored. In anyone who has ever loved something so purely, worked so hard, and still been made to pay a price they never agreed to. We know this story. We have lived parts of it. And so, let us take it with us. Devotion that does not need permission is the deepest kind. Ekalavya could not get into school, so he built the school inside himself. That is not consolation, it's a philosophy. He did not wait to be validated before he began. He did not require the Guru's physical presence to internalize the Guru's teachings. He turned rejection into a room and decided to live in it productively. And in doing so, he created something that the system had not prepared for, a level of mastery that arrived from a direction no one was watching. The world is full of systems that decide in advance who's allowed to learn, who's allowed to grow, and who's allowed to enter. And those systems are wrong, repeatedly and consistently. But the lesson of Ekalavya is not wait for the system to change. It is begin anyway. Build your clay figure. Practice in the forest. Do not wait for permission to become who you already know you are. For the first generation student who has no mentor, for the self-taught artist who never went to school, for the person who built something quietly, alone, while others were handed the tools. Your effort is not lesser because no one witnessed it. What you built in the margins is real. Systems are not neutral, and seeing that clearly is an act of courage. There is a version of this story that is told as a lesson in obedience. Look how devotedly Ekalavya accepted his Guru's demand. What a noble student! That reading must be examined, because a system that presents its injustice as spiritual virtue is more dangerous than one that is openly cruel. When the extraction of someone's most precious gift is framed as an act of sacred duty, we must be brave enough to ask, whose interest does this sacred duty serve? Drona was not a monster. He was a man who operated within the logic of his world without questioning it. And that is perhaps more instructive than a monster would be. Because most harm is not done by monsters. It's done by people who follow the rules, fit the roles, and never ask whether the rules themselves are just. For the leader, the most important question is not, am I following the rules? But, do the rules serve everyone equally? For the teacher, the parent, the manager. What promises have you made that come at someone else's cost? What have you protected that you were never supposed to hoard? Seeing a system clearly, including the systems you benefit from, is not disloyalty. It is the beginning of wisdom. What is taken from you cannot take away what you became. The thumb was gone, the archery remained. That's perhaps the most quietly radical thing the Mahabharata says about human resilience. The world took the thing Ekalavya had worked hardest for, and he did not disappear. He adapted, he continued, and he became a warrior that history still remembers 2,000 years later. There is a kind of theft that people believe is final. The opportunity that was denied, the credit that was stolen, the recognition that never came. the position that was given to someone with fewer qualifications and the right connections. These are real, they're not small, and they deserve to be named for what they are. But they're not the end of the story, because what grew in you during all those years of practice, all those early mornings, all that solitary work cannot be confiscated. No one can take your understanding. No one can issue a decree against your wisdom. No one can remove what the years have made of you. Ekalavya lost his thumb. He did not lose himself. And that's the difference that outlasts everything. Ekalavya never got the acknowledgement he deserved in his own lifetime. No court celebrated him. No chronicle placed him at the center of its pages. But he stood in the forest, alone, with a clay face for a teacher, and he became so extraordinary that the greatest archer of his age came to ask, "Who did this?" That question is his monument, more permanent than stone. He lived on the margins. He worked in silence. He gave everything, even when it cost him everything. And he continued. If you have ever felt unseen, under-resourced, or turned away from a door that should have been open to you, Ekalavya was there before you, and he asks you quietly to keep going. The forest will know. The arrows will remember. The work you do in private will one day be impossible to ignore. This was The Legend of Ekalavya, a story by Samsara Sagas. While the story ends here, the journey continues within you.